Hey listeners, welcome to episode 144 of the Ceres Podcast. In this episode of Read the News, we have the one and only Jim Cowie. You may remember Jim when he came on episode 91 with his son Ashley to discuss the Seaspiracy programme on Netflix. We're really excited to welcome Jim to the Ceres Podcast. He's a visionary whose career has spanned over 50 years in fishing, hospitality, and now he's a podcaster. Beginning in the 1960s with his family's fish business in Helmsdale, Jim significantly contributed to the industry's growth, expanding operations across the UK and beyond, and ensuring UK caught fish and shellfish reached wider markets. His work includes groundbreaking initiatives in trade missions, sustainable fishing practices, and bridging the gap between fishermen and international markets. Jim's commitment extended to promoting sustainable seafood through the acclaimed Captain Galley seafood restaurant, recognised for its dedication to sustainability and quality, earning numerous awards. With a passion for education and advocacy, Jim has shared his knowledge through various platforms, leading to the launch of his Seafood Matters podcast. This platform serves as a way of giving back to the industry, focusing on promoting lesser-known seafood species and sustainable practices. Jim remains actively involved in the industry, supporting fishermen and advocating for the seafood sector. His life work reflects a deep commitment to sustainability, industry growth and community engagement, making him a truly inspirational figure in the seafood industry. Today's product focus is the Ceres mushy pea seasoning. Homemade mushy peas were a quintessential British delight, essential to the British fish and chip experience. The tragedy of bland, textureless mushy peas are all too common. Well, no more, because we're here to help. We champion the art of crafting mushy peas from scratch, a simple change that promises a boost in profits but also a surge in customer satisfaction. The difference in taste and texture between freshly made homemade mushy peas and tinned or frozen peas is undeniable. Many people I speak to over the years say to me, I sell tin peas because I don't sell a lot, and I often say you don't sell a lot because you use tin peas. We can help you make even better mushy peas with our recipe booklets, several articles to help you soak them and clean them, and also our new natural bicarbonate of soda, all to help you make great, vibrant, delicious mushy peas. Forget the hassle of mixing all the numerous ingredients, all the guesswork, the nasty artificial liquid greens. Just use the Ceres mushy pea seasoning because it guarantees outstandingly tasty mushy peas time after time. Increase your sales and profits today with homemade mushy peas made with Ceres pea seasoning. Order the pea seasoning today from ceres.shop with free delivery to mainland UK. We also deliver to Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and all the British Isles. And because we kept getting lots of requests for shipping abroad, we're also happy to announce that we've now activated shipping for Belgium, France, Italy, Germany, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Spain and Greece. Is there someone you think we should be talking to on the Ceres podcast? Is there anyone doing something interesting? If that's a big yes, let me know by email at stelios@worldofceres.com. If you want to keep in the loop with what we're doing at Ceres, then you should be following us on social media. But to get the information delivered to you first, then you need to be on our mailing list because everything gets delivered to your inbox. And special offers only get delivered to your inbox. The link will be in the episode show notes and the adjoining article for this podcast episode. Be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast player because it helps us reach a wider audience in the hospitality industry. On to the episode with Jim. I really hope you enjoy it and I'd love to hear your thoughts afterwards. Hi Jim, welcome to the Ceres Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Stelios. Good to be with you again.
It's great to have you on again. I think the last time you were on was, episode 91, and we were talking about We had you and Ashley on, and we were talking about the Seaspiracy program. I won't call it a documentary. I'd call it a program. And so, we had you on then, and you helped us decipher some of those issues. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Pleasure. My pleasure is mine.
So today we're doing a Read the News podcast, and I'm grateful because you've chosen 4 excellent articles. Obviously, I think one of the biggest ones at the moment, I thought it was the biggest one when it first came out in the news, whereas actually when you then read the article, there wasn't much to it. And that's the truth behind the Russia ban. And to give listeners a bit of background information, there was the Daily Mail, I think it was, went out with an article that says that the Russians were banning British fleets from entering Russian waters. What's your thoughts on this article, Jim?
I've got probably all my different sort of senses. I feel annoyed, I feel disappointed, and it's really very, very misleading. And the disappointment is how national newspapers can distort a story so much that could have an impact on other sectors of our industries. For example, I feel somebody reading that is quite likely to think, a ban, this could lead to fish and chips being more expensive. And it's just nothing close to the truth.
Yeah.
So that's the broader feeling about it.
I think those sort of articles are there just to stoke people's tensions, aren't they? They're not factual. And I think within about 2 lines, it actually says that it's purely symbolic. There was no, from what I understand, and you'd know better than me, I don't think there are any fishing vessels from UK in Russian waters. Is that right? Or is there some?
That's one of the other things that I find annoying, Stelios, because as far as the answer is, you'll accuse me now of sounding like a politician. The answer is yes, and the answer is no.
Yeah.
There is a boat, the Kirkella.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I take it the story with the Ellas. It was going back to the Mars days, and they're all areas around Hull, and Swanella, Farnella, Kirkella. Well, they have the Kirkella, but that boat was sold so it's owned by Icelandic people.
Okay.
And it's actually now even gone further, and there's part Icelandic, part Dutch. Now, if you go back even further, there was a boat. There was a guy, a very prominent fisherman in Scotland at the time, Terry Taylor, his name was. He had a boat, the Dorothy Gray, and then he bought another bigger one called the Glenrose. Can't remember now if he actually bought it or built it. And he had a quota. He got a quota for fishing that area, White Sea, northern Norway, and whatnot. And that was the only person in the UK that had quota for that area. Hence, what the Kirkella fishes is what used to be Terry's quota.
Oh, I see.
So he has British crew on board, and he lands in the UK. He's a freezer trawler, so it'll be going into our fish and chip shops. So you could say there's probably a degree where the HMRC get revenue from crew's wages and things, but it's doing absolutely nothing for the British fishing fleet, and because it's all owned by Icelandic and Dutch.
Yeah.
And the other sad thing about it, Stelios, there's there must be a good 6 to 8 boats in our register now, owned by family boats, owned by one or two guys, the backbone of the fishing industry going back in history. And they're capable of fishing that area. So there's politics being played when it's really way, way off the mark.
But you say that it only benefits HMRC, but it must benefit obviously the people that work there and the people that process it, and then the British sellers that then obviously sell it. It obviously benefits onwards, the onward journey.
But it's processed. It's a freezer trawler. It's processed on board, so the crew are the only people needed.
Yeah, but I guess
maybe landing. There is a small benefit. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know a lot about fishing, but it's obviously I know nothing about fishing in comparison to you. But the difference being that, let's say, if a day boat went out, they catch it, come back, it's processed on land. Is that right? Processed on land no. Okay, what would happen with a day boat then?
Oh, the day boat. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the difference being is that this is just processed on a boat, I guess, on a freezer trawler.
There's a rule of thumb, Stelios, on what you call a day boat. Now we would call them freshers, boats that are not freezing. So they could be anything from day boat to landing within a week.
Okay.
There's a rule of thumb in the industry: for every man at sea, there's 7 jobs ashore.
Okay.
Now you take it, there's the agents, there's the transport, there's the processors, the retailer. You take all people involved in that fish, going from the boat to when it's landed to it's on the fishmonger's slab.
Yeah.
It's 7 jobs.
Interesting. So what's your thoughts on the wider topic of tariffs? Do you think government should penalise other countries with tariffs?
I'm not good on tariffs. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
No, it's not that when I say I'm not good in them, I don't believe in tariffs.
Okay, so you don't believe in tariffs. So
No.
You think in a way that anyone that's trading goods should just be 0 tariffs on either side?
Unless it's other factors beyond that, like if there's like the Russian situation just now, well, I think rather than say tariffs, look, anything, you can't deal with Russia just now, but rather than I like the market. I think the market sorts things out.
Yeah, I sort of believe in a way that if you just remove friction, let the market do what it's got to do, and if it's popular, it's popular, and if it's not popular, then it doesn't work. And I do think in a way having a tariff didn't really do a lot because, well, especially in the Russian situation, because it does initially have a bit of a spike, but then Russia just sells fish to somebody else. And let's say in this instance, it's what we thought they were going to do. They then sell the fish block frozen without filleting it, mostly headless and gutted to China, let's say, even whole without headless and gutting it. And then it gets processed over there and it comes back through other channels. So, and it just comes processed and breaded and, so it doesn't actually have a huge effect in the end. Whereas really, if they just banned it, that would probably be a stronger stance, wouldn't it? Rather than putting a tariff on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But I guess then, where does it end? And, I guess it's a tough conversation to have, really. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of tariffs because I've never really understood, other than protectionism, why they existed.
That's what I feel. That's exactly what I feel. And I do honestly trust the market. And I mean, going back to the freshing boats, it's supply and demand. It's the supply that creates a demand.
Yeah.
If you get, just say for one unit, a box of haddock, let's say, it makes £50 today, and it makes £100 tomorrow. That's because there's not so much about. So there's a keen, and that's the way fishing has been going back historic. Supply and demand. Supply dictates the demand. It could be a lot of fish around, and the demand is down. They don't have to pay so much.
Yeah.
It could be bad weather, which a lot of the boats are not getting out. So the bigger ones that do get out can benefit from it because the price will be higher because there's not so much about. That's the way fishing has worked going back in history.
Yeah. No, I get that completely.
The other thing that I feel when I say disappointing is one of the reactions is I'm seeing some articles on it and people are responding, which I think in certain bodies they're right that they should. And Mike Cohen of what we call the NFFO, which is the National Federation of Fishermen, he made a very clear statement saying the position on it as far as fishing boats or fishing, UK fishing is concerned. That's the National Federation of Fishermen. So now, on the other hand, we've got the NFFF, as we call it, National Federation of Fish Fryers, where we have Andrew Crooks, the president, and he's completely silent. And I think that's not fair on his members.
Do you think the NFFF should have said more on the matter?
I think they should have made a statement and taken a position. I don't know, but my suspicion is Andrew's buying that fish, which I'm not saying it's illegal or wrong. I don't mean that. But why is he silent when he's a position in a national organisation?
Well, I think a statement should have been said regardless of what fish he uses, because I think regardless of his personal affiliations, he runs an organisation. So I think a statement on behalf, even if it wasn't him, even if it was from the NFFF, should have been put out saying this story is absolute, it's just nothing. There's nothing to this story. So, yeah, I think that probably should have happened, really.
The interesting thing, Stelios, going forward is, will the Kirkella be stopped fishing there? Because what's the ban? Is it British registered? Is it British owned?
Yeah, this is the problem when it comes to fishing, because there's a difference between where the boat is from and where it's owned, who staffs it. Because I think you can. If I'm right, I don't know a lot about maritime law, but it can be owned in a different country to avoid certain taxes. Is that right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really understand too much about it, but it is a British registered boat, isn't it? I think at the moment, Kirkella isn't it?
Yeah. It's registered hull, but not only is it does that happen for tax purposes, but they have less regulations to come up to. They're like the MCA, which is health and safety on a fishing boat.
Yeah,
they register in maybe Caribbean countries where it's less rigid, and they don't have to come up to the standards that the British boats would have to come up to.
Oh, I see. Well, I think interesting to say the least. I think that the problem is when there's a war or whatever you want to call the Ukraine. I think it's fair to say it's a war. I think at first I thought maybe it was a skirmish, but it's gone on a bit longer than that now. So it's a war. Everything gets diluted by the noise, and the noise is whose side are you on, what the paper's saying. But I think we can agree that this article was purely symbolic. They're having a little moan, and they're trying to, I guess, create division. And I think this is the problem with today's media. And I don't even think it's today's media. I think you'd agree that the newspapers were the same when you were a kid, that it's always there to create division rather than unity.
Well, you take the papers that have printed it, Stelios. You call them up today and say, "Oh, by the way, this situation has been resolved and there's a good news story in it." They wouldn't be interested in printing that.
No, not at all. There just seems to be no emphasis on good news these days. But I think it's always been the same. I really do.
Yeah.
Think of what makes the front page. 99% of the time, it's murders and things that terrify people. Every now and then it's a World Cup thing, which is quite a big news, positive story. Everyone's behind it. Whether it's the coronation or something, but that's very rare. 99% of the time, it's there to make people be scared, to buy the paper, shock value, and then you open it and you think, "Oh, is that it?" So, yeah. But yeah. Moving on.
We have a similar situation just now in the UK. We have a lot of boats fishing the UK fishery. They're Spanish owned. They've bought quota over the years for the UK waters, and they've registered in the UK, so they're flying the British flag.
Mm-hmm.
And they're crewed by Filipinos, Ghanaians, you name it. That's a real bone of contention with us just now.
I was going to say, because I'm on a fisherman group. I think I told you this before, and they mentioned yesterday there was a lot of Spanish lorries in Scrabster waiting to be loaded. And but if you're saying that you like to leave the free market to do its thing, if those Spanish boats have bought the quota, then somebody won, didn't they? Somebody got paid. So I guess someone could buy them back off the Spanish, couldn't they? Am I wrong in thinking that?
You're right. They just paid more than we could.
What is that, though? Is that because they want the fish more over there? There must be a reason for that.
The problem with it's the methods they fish and the practices they do. They're using gill net and long line. Now, if you look at some of the NGOs, they'll tell you that's perceived as a sustainable way of fishing, which in certain areas it is. But the way they do it, it's anything but, because if you could imagine, gill net and long line, their equipment used is what we call monofilament. Mm-hmm. Monofilament. It's basically it's plastic. It'll never rot. Now, they never take any disused gear they have. They're never landed. They're dumped. And Scottish boats are constantly. Alan, who you've met, Alan Addison, he's just telling me last week he's taking over a ton in every trip of disused gear. Now, you take that over a year, and you're talking and that's one boat. So we're talking in hundreds of tons of disused gear. And the problem is with it, that never rots. And with the result that as they're going around getting in the currents, taking them in the seabed, they're catching fish all the time.
Yeah.
It's called ghost fishing.
Okay.
So it's hugely damaging, and nobody seems to be interested. They're not. Marine Scotland are what you would call the police of the fishing grounds here. They never board them to check them. They're never monitored when they're landing. So it's a real serious situation.
So why does Marine Scotland do nothing about that?
the feeling with a lot of fishermen is that with our SNP government, they don't want to upset the EU countries, because if they ever got independence, which God forbid, I hope they never do, they would want back into Europe.
Oh, I see. So, but usually the SNP in Scotland take a stronger line on environmental issues than the rest of the UK. But it almost looks like, from what you're saying, anecdotally, they're looking the other way just because what if something happens, and then what if another thing happens? There's two what ifs, whereas something is actually happening, which is what you're saying, plastic monofilaments being dropped into the sea. That is actually happening. If that's true, and you've got no reason to lie, it almost thinks like, why not just deal with it? How hard is it to deal with that issue? Just say, take your rubbish back. Can't be that hard, surely.
The Green Brigade, as we call them, the lobbies, they actually believe that is a sustainable. They actually believe that is a sustainable method of fishing, and I don't know what you would class it as, annoying or dangerous, but there are certain boats. There's boats fishing down in the channel with gillnet, and yes, it is sustainable. They take their gear ashore, they'll mend it on the pier, put it back on board and take it back out. So it is sustainable.
Yeah.
But it's almost like this green lobby, Stelios, don't have a clue and realise what's happening in industrial scale up in the northwest of Shetland and down the west coast. Oh. But we talk about the SNP. There's a classic example of them when Alex Salmond was the first minister back a few years. And I mentioned earlier about the Mars situation with quota. Now, they had a massive quota, obviously, as you can imagine, from their days with all the Mar trawlers. And they had a company that had a base in Scotland. So the boats in that P&J, they're called P&J Johnston. So the P&J, as we call them, they had access to the Mars quota, and a lot of the boats that were fishing, they were in the, as we call it, the P&J was their agents, so they had access to that quota, and that was a big situation for them. It was a big advantage for them having access to the Mars quota. So, in his infinite wisdom, Alex Salmond, without taking any listening or taking any attention from the industry, he thought he was going to be real smart. And what he was going to do was ring fence the Scottish quota to protect it. And what he did, what happened as a result of that, by ring fencing the Scottish quota, that boat couldn't get access to the Mars because it was English. Oh. So it actually caused more havoc than, and if he just asked the industry, they could have told him, anybody. I could have told them standing in Scrapster. So that's what we're up against with the SNP.
A friend of mine always says that MPs might be well-intentioned, they just don't understand what's actually happening. So they then make a decision which actually has more knock-on effects. And I think that's what you're basically saying. So moving on to the next topic, norovirus outbreak leads to an oyster sale ban in France. It is what it says, really. There was a recent norovirus outbreak in the southwest of France. This led to a ban on sales from oysters from Arcachon Bay. So this is a big deal for the French, I would imagine. I don't want to upset you, but some would say that the French are the best oysters in the world. What's your thoughts on that? Am I going to set you off now?
You have. Well, will I just leave the studio now?
Go on, tell us why it's a problem and why you know, could this happen also in Scotland, you know?
To be absolutely brutally honest, Stelios, yes, it happens all the time. It's nature. It's what they call blooms, algae blooms, and it's depending on what time of year it is. It's obviously more in the summer. It's a bigger problem in the summer, and but it's I think it's just blown up out of all proportions. I
Yeah.
mean, it's quite a common thing, and really, it's credit to the industry and the way it's operated, Stelios, for them to find that out. But I don't think it is because somebody went to hospital or that they found it out. Because, I mean, I know in this country, before an oyster farm can be selling oysters, there's water samples all the time. All the time, and they have to be sent to laboratories. Every one of them does that all the time. And then if there's a reading, PSP is the name, which is a terrible name. Paralytic shellfish poisoning. I mean, they could call it something less dramatic, alarming than that. And so the oyster farms, they know they're monitoring their water all the time.
I read that a lot of the farmers, the oyster farmers, have been complaining for a while, actually, because they're saying that the reason this has happened is because the heavy rains cause overflows with sewage, and it contaminates coastal waters. And they're saying that the wastewater treatment facilities are massively underfunded, which sounds like we could be talking about the UK. Every news story in the UK at the moment is how wastewater, and treatment plants are underfunded. And yet France, it always sort of, maybe it's louder in their domestic news, but no one seems to draw the parallels that they seem to be having similar issues to the UK when it comes to water treatment.
I think we have to trust the industry and the way it's monitoring situations like that, because we get reading. We'll get an announcement for a whole fishing area to say there's a reading over, and I mean, it's so many parts per million, and it sounds really dramatic, 400 or something like that, and you think, my goodness, that's really bad. It takes about 300 or 400 before you actually maybe feel a wee bit, your tummy a wee bit. You think it's going to kill you. So I think it's a bit over the top. But they'll close an area, and that happens all over the UK as well at certain times of the year. And so they just don't fish. I'm not talking about whitefish here. It never, none of that ever affects whitefish.
So say if, for example, I think probably half the issue with oysters is that they're all mostly 99.9% of them consume raw. So then that's probably one of the issues here with this exact norovirus infection. Norovirus essentially gives people sickness and diarrhea, spreads pretty fast, but also it sort of deals with itself pretty fast too. The body sort of gets rid of it after 2-3 days. Doesn't mean it's nice, but it happens. So do you think that, again, this is an issue where government or local authority just isn't listening? Because if they were listening to those farmers who were complaining about the wastewater treatment facilities, they could have acted on it sooner.
Have you come across a scientist that listens?
I don't know. I think there is. I think it's bureaucracy that gets in the way. I think if you put a scientist next to let's say, a fisherman who really knows his job, or an oyster fisherman or oyster grower, let's say, I think they'd probably come to the same conclusion. One might use a lot of tests and facts, and the other one's going to shoot from the hip a little bit more because he knows what he touches every day and what he sees, or what they see and touch every day. So one's coming from a very emotional, evocative point of view because they handle that product, they're passionate about that product, they believe in it. And then the other one's going to come from a scientific point of view. I think the problem is when politics comes into play. I think then it's like, oh well, we can't upset the sewage people because we don't want to upset them and blah blah blah, and we don't want to upset this company and that company. We've got elections to fight. And I think once politics comes into play, decisions start to get muddled up. I think that's the problem here, is that politics gets involved with decisions like this when it should have nothing to do with politics, in my view.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Maybe I'm being a bit too, what's the word my friend calls me sometimes, a bit idealistic. But I think really this shouldn't affect politics at all.
But it does, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And putting a context to this as well, Stelios, when we get this readings of algae bloom in the sea, and we do, and it sounds dramatic, and they're told, fishermen are told, right, you can't catch fish, but they can't catch in this area. But we're only talking about bivalve mollusks.
Yeah.
So we're only talking about oysters, mussels, scallops, as far as our area is concerned. And it's only for a short period, and then it's gone again. But we have oyster beds close to, I'm saying close to us. There's two very well reputable oyster farms about 40 miles away from where I am just now, up in the northwest. And they've got AA quality readings in their water.
Wow.
all the year round, with massive water displacement, with oxygen. Tide goes out, 6 hours out, half an hour, then 6 hours in, and they're getting complete freshwater water displacement.
Oysters clean the water
every day.
Oysters clean the water, don't they?
But absolutely, totally, they're great for the water, and because they're filter feeders.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then we eat that, so that goes.
But it's good for us, and we need it. Our gut needs it, and it has to be, it needs that raw. That's why you look at a lot of the Japanese, say, for instance, they eat a lot of raw fish. It's so good for your gut.
Yeah.
All the enzymes that are not cooked out. So I would be devastated if the instructions ever were to boil them for 20 minutes before you eat them.
Oh no, never. I think I'm tempted, but as you know, I make batter mix, so I'm tempted to see what it's like fried. I think I might have had them fried a while ago, battered fried. But I guess they'd just be like a mussel at that point, wouldn't they? Like a cooked mussel. I think.
Stelios, stop there. Can I tell you something?
Go on.
When I had the fish and chip in Scrabster, fish and chip shop in Scrabster, you know that because I used your batter. Well, let me tell you, your batter, I had on the menu battered oysters. And quite often I used your gluten-free batter because it was nice and light.
Yeah.
But I've still used I can't remember the one. It wasn't the natural.
The wheat-based natural.
Yeah, I've used that, and I've used your gluten-free, and I had people traveling to have them.
Well, they have to get to Scrabster.
They're fantastic. But let me tell you, that's passed the test, and they're wonderful.
So you're allowed. Fantastic. So what you're saying is oysters are to be consumed raw unless they're fried in natural batter mix or gluten-free Ceres natural batter mix. That's what you're saying. It. Sounds. I think that's a law I can get behind. To be honest, I think that's.
You want to try them? You should honestly try them.
So
they're just
moving on to the next topic. So this is a big one, I think, in general. Scottish Hospitality, urgent call for rate relief support. Urgent plea from Scottish hospitality sector for rate relief support as around 10,000 businesses face critical challenges without government intervention. They want the help ahead of the budget, which probably won't happen. So, what are your thoughts on this? Why is this an article that you chose?
Because I just feel strongly about it, and I think it's. I mean, my background, as well as the fishing industry, was I had a seafood restaurant and what would you call it, a chippy.
Yeah.
So I've had that hats on, and I can see now it's a difficult industry. It's a real difficult. People say to me now, "Do you miss it?" I certainly miss the people and that, but I don't miss the trading because it's not an easy. It's not an easy trade, and the what the sectors we're talking about are retail and leisure. I think that hospitality, retail and leisure. And there's a farcical situation, I know, Stelios. There's a friend of mine, his son is a personal trainer, and he has a gym just on the border, on what we call the border area, which is just close to England border. And 15 miles away, over the border, I don't know who it is, but there's a guy, and he's a personal trainer, and he's got a gym. And this friend of mine tells me that all this, he's getting the help through because England and Wales get it. And in Scotland they don't. So he's at a massive disadvantage.
So what I can't find is that. So I've done a bit of research, and it looks like that the small business rate relief does apply in Scotland, but they call it a small business bonus. But apparently, it's actually more generous than in England. Because in addition to the 100% discount for rateable value up to 12k, in England there's another 25%, and it's rateable value up to 20,000. But you're saying that people don't see that, they're not getting it. Is that right?
Well, because how many businesses are below the threshold?
Well, the problem is,
and it's based on turnover. So it's a double. It's based on the rate of value is based on the turnover of your business, and so if you get the turnover down, so that you'll get that relief. Well, where's your business going? How are you going to?
You're in the fish and chip groups, as am I. I think you're still in the fish and chip groups. I'm not sure on Facebook. And I did a quick poll last week. I wouldn't say it's not. It's accurate because it's all fish and chip shop owners, but it said that 80%, also 82% of people that commented or posted on the poll said that they don't pay business rates because they're a small business. So I think this affects larger restaurants. In hospitality, it affects the larger venues, and it probably affects people with multiple venues, whereas the majority of smaller venues or not very busy venues would fall under the small business rate relief. I actually think this is probably where the problem is. The problem is 50%, if not more, of the people in the end don't actually pay full rates. So someone has to then pay that, and that falls, unfortunately, on other businesses, which isn't nice, I guess.
Well, absolutely, but don't lose sight of the fact that the Scottish government get the money from Westminster.
So you mentioned this yesterday when we were chatting, that you think that SNP are getting the money. They're getting paid from Westminster. Is this separate to the Barnett formula or the Barnett formula?
I'm not going to go into the.
Oh, okay. We'll turn it because
I know the money. They get the money, and it's not allocated where it should be, apportioned to where it should be.
So I guess they're getting, because I think this is the sort of problem that I see sometimes with the SNP, looking at it from the outside. I'm not from Scotland, but they've fought for devolution. They've got it. They then spend the money, and then they moan to Westminster and say, "Hey, we need more." And actually, all the benefits generally in Scotland are more generous. Consumers or the average person, non-business, do get a lot more bang for their buck in Scotland than you would in England, let's say. And I think it's fair to say that Wales get a bit more than Welsh people get more than the English person, let's say. So can you have it both ways? Can you have it where businesses are getting more, but then prescriptions are also lower, education levels are higher? Do you think that both things can be true?
I don't know what you mentioned, but I don't know what you say there. But what education levels are higher?
When I say levels, I mean like you get freer education at higher levels, shall I say, to clarify.
The consensus of opinion in Scotland, Stelios, is that the SNP government have absolutely decimated what was classed as the envy of the world as far as education system was concerned. It was an education system second to none. And you look at some of the inventors and people that have gone really far in the world. On a number of occasions, they were Scottish descendants. They've absolutely wrecked you get people now, unfortunately, barely spell and write.
Yeah. Well, what I meant, though, as well, is that things that are free in Scotland. So, for example, in England, we have to pay for student tuition fees at university, prescriptions, eye tests, and so on and so on. And in Scotland, these are given to the population. So can they also give all of that and then let businesses with lower rates, if that makes sense? Can you? Because I've always found that when you're left-leaning, like the SNP or Labour, they're very supportive by giving consumers more money to spend. So I've got a friend of mine who he says, I always vote Labour. He goes, I know it's not good for business in the traditional sense. He goes, but they give my customers more money to spend. And I thought about that, actually. So that is almost good for business in some ways because his customers have more money to spend. But it's probably not good for business because he has to pay more probably corporation tax and so on. So can you have both is what I'm saying. If people want both of those things to be true with SNP, could that be true?
Well, nobody can ever have everything, but it's funny you should say that, you make that comment, because it reminded me of a comment as far back as my father used to say. He says that the working man votes Labour, but they actually do better under a Conservative government.
Oh, is that true? What?
Well, their tax would be reduced, for example.
Oh, I see.
But to go back to the SNP from what you were mentioning there about free this and free that, Stelios, what kind of society comes up with an invention that they increase the tax, the highest tax bracket, so they're penalising the wealth creators to give free to people that invariably don't work. So the wealth, the people that, and what's that doing for the future of the country? Because what I'm sure you'll remember in the past, we called it the brain drain. Because the high achievers were taxed. And that's the fear. That's the fear in Scotland just now, that people are going to go across the border.
I see. Interesting. Well, I guess it's a tough one. I think from what I can see online and reading up on these things, and I can see that there is a generous support package for business rates that looks like it's better than England. However, you're saying that doesn't filter through. So it'd be interesting to see what happens over the next budget and the next election. Because SNP, whatever you say, they do keep getting voted in with a strong majority. So people must want them, if you get what I mean.
watch this space.
I'll watch. You can text me on the day.
Yeah, I think they're being found out for what they are, and some of the scandalous situations which I'm sure you've heard about. I think the people are starting to realise just what's going on, and I think I better be careful, Stelios, or your podcast could be libelous.
Yeah, probably best we stop there then. So on to our final topic. E. coli outbreak tied to Mrs. Kirkham's Lancashire cheese. The outbreak of the E. coli linked to Mrs. Kirkham's Lancashire cheese, which tragically resulted in one fatality, multiple hospitalisations across the UK, prompting a recall from an artisanal product. So this is a raw milk cheese, and they found a real rare strain of a toxin called the Shiga toxin producing E. coli stec. Oh, that's a long word. That's a longer bit of everything, really. So what is your thoughts on this? Why did you choose this one?
Because I think what actually maybe it's coming from the other side, as you could say, not thinking of the people. I feel sorry for anybody that had a problem with it, and I don't wish anybody to have that. But I think it's almost similar, an absolute similarity to what we were talking about, the oysters. And it must be hugely damaging for the cheesemaker.
Mm.
And what it's cost them to get it rectified and back on. But so what's happened? What's gone on? Because I was just looking up one or two notes, and here it says over 40 samples. This is Kirkham's. This is themselves. Over 40 samples of milk and cheese made by Kirkham's over a 5-month period have been tested since investigations began, and none showed evidence of the outbreak strain of suspected pathogen. So
do you think it could have happened elsewhere in the supply chain, maybe?
Yeah, and I mean, I may be oversimplifying a situation, Stelios, but what did they take into consideration? If somebody did pick up something from eating a cheese or an oyster or anything, well, have they ever asked, what did the person do before they ate it? Was it sitting on a windowsill in baking hot sunshine for half a day? I quite often remember not lots of complaints, but you would get somebody coming back and saying, "Oh, that fish I bought from it wasn't as good as I expected. It wasn't very fresh. It was a bit of a smell. Oh, that's strange." And I says, "You bought it in the shop, okay?" And you would go through the whole thing with them, and they would have it on the back ledge or the dashboard of the car with the sun beating in the windscreen or back window, and for their journey home. So it's got to be in context and the whole thing looked at.
I remember a few years ago there was a Scottish milk producer, and the name of the producer just completely evades me at the moment. And
Errington.
That's it, Errington Cheeses. That's it. And and they
went through the same thing.
Yeah, and I think they did all the tests, and they found that the cheese that was coming off the site was absolutely fine. They did all the tests. I think they nearly went bust, if I'm honest. I'm not sure if they've got back up to speed. But
they did almost go bust.
Say again, sorry.
They did very near go bust.
Yeah, and I think when I was chatting to the lady there, she mentioned that they think that what had happened is on the delivery vehicle, at the final delivery. So when the cheesemonger was doing their stops, they something must have landed on the cheese, whether it was a bit of blood or something else that then started fermenting again, and that's probably what made someone sick. So the problem with raw milk products is that they are at higher risk. They're not the odds are still good, but if they're being treated like a product that is pasteurized, then that's where the risk starts to come in, I think. Because I think that we can't look at how beneficial pasteurization of milk has been hugely beneficial to population since it started. So that is one of the main reasons why, the fact that raw milk now isn't as prevalent as it was. But it's a tricky one. Like, do you think these sort of stories make the government overreact? Do they then overreact and say, you're not allowed to do this?
Stelios, I don't even agree with you about pasteurisation.
Go on, which bit?
About that, how much it's benefited us all. It's just got us to a society and a state where our guts can't handle, and the raw milk is better for us, better for our gut.
But they do say that pasteurizing milk doesn't kill the nutritional value; it keeps it the same. So, and also a lot of people are quite sensitive. And I get what you're saying. You're saying that you're of the generation where you probably think my generation is coddled, and we've had too much Dettol sprayed on our plates, and where you're like, we get told to stop licking the floor. I get it completely. We're of a different generation, but I do think that by pasteurizing the milk, I'll give you an example. In our fridge at the office, I said that it's a very cold fridge, and we had milk in there that was 2-3 days old, and the lad was still making tea with it. And I says to him, "Does it smell okay?" And he goes, "Yep, it does." And it's a few days gone, but it smells. He said it smells absolutely fine. So he's carried on. And I said, "Look, it's probably fair to say that it's okay, but we don't have to keep drinking it. We can get fresh milk as we need it." But if that was raw milk and you had those relaxed standards, someone would be very ill. And I think that's what I'm getting at, is that it does build in a level of safety that maybe we do take for granted,
So what you're saying there is that it's the raw milk that's made the mill.
No, I'm saying that the standards we apply to raw milk. So if we treat raw milk like pasteurized milk, like you said, are they keeping it on a window ledge where it was warm and it got hot? If we're treating raw milk products the same as pasteurized products, then that's the problem, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying I think people should be allowed to eat whatever they want to eat, but I think they should treat it properly. That's what I think. I think we're on the same page, I think.
Taking it a slightly different slant, one of the things that I feel here is almost, you could say, well, you've been asking me questions. I could almost swing this one back at you. In 1939, there were 202 farms making cheese in Lancashire. Mm-hmm. Today, Kirkham's is the only one.
Wow.
And that to me speaks volumes, and I think it's sad.
I'd agree that I think it does speak volumes, but I think what it shows us in a way is how, and I think you would hate this because I don't think you'd be a fan of this, but I would say that although we've gone from 202 to 1, I would imagine currently that 1 produces more than those 202 put together, because the scales that we work at these days, the amount of cheese that the UK produces now probably dwarfs what they did 80 years ago, with loads more farms and producers. Everything seems to have gone, I guess, in some ways I think it's starting to correct itself, but I think for a while everything just became big and all about volume. And I guess you could buy a very cheap cheese that, let's say, was a cheddar for argument's sake, that has had zero maturation, and that was probably the biggest seller for a long time. Although I do see that correcting itself now. We're starting to see 24-month, 36-month matured cheeses. Is it the same maturation as what they used to do years ago in caves? Probably not. It's probably all in plastic. But I guess life changes to some degree, doesn't it? If that makes sense.
No, absolutely it does. And I don't, what your point there is that the one might be producing more than the 202. Obviously, neither of us know, going back to 1939, but there's a possibility. But I mean, when you think of what a way of life it would have been, you could have gone anywhere in Lancashire and got a wonderful cheese. And my fear that going forward is that we're going to finish up. It's almost like everything's sterile, and we have no immunity to anything because it'll be laboratory produced.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I think for me, I think if you're going to be dealing with raw milk, that's absolutely fine. But it does almost need to be in laboratory conditions. It needs to be sterile because the milk isn't. And that means that, like you said earlier, they need to be sending samples away for tests. And if they're proving that they're doing something right, then they should be allowed to carry on with the law backing them, in my opinion. You know, I watched a video a few years ago. It was about a chicken producer, small holding chicken producer in America. And the American law said that they had to either wash the chicken in chlorine or an alkaline solution. So I guess something like caustic soda. And that removes the first layer of bacteria to slow down the bacteria growth. And all they did was pluck and wash. And we're talking, it was like a beautiful farm, and they just washed in wooden barrels. And the FDA, the Federal Food and Drink Administration in America, said you can't do this. And the chap says, take as many chickens away as you want over as long as a period as you want. So over a year, take a chicken a day if you want, and tell me if it has more or the same amount of bacteria than chicken that's been washed with chemicals, let's say. And they took samples away, and they basically proved that he was right, that there was just the same as, because whatever, it's a dead animal. There's going to be bacteria. It needs to be cooked, and they still tried to force him to change. And in the end, I think he just started killing less animals because then he fell under a certain level. But they just kept going and going. Whereas what I'm saying is, if you can prove that the bacteria levels are low, or at least safe, then carry on as you are. But I do think it's education for the consumer too. If they are getting this any cheese actually, whether it's raw milk cheese or pasteurized milk cheese, if you're getting cheese and putting it out, in a sunny, warm room, you forget about it, go make a phone call, come back, and it's been stewing in this room for 45 minutes to an hour. And then you think, oh, that's a bit smelly, but that's how this cheese is meant to be. You're going to have a serious problem. So I think it's back to the consumer, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. But I just have this fear as well, Stelios, that we're going to it's going to come an age when we have it's going to be exacerbated, and it's going to get worse because as the regulations are tightened, our immunity lowers. So the least little thing is going to flag up, and I don't feel well. It's that chicken or it's that bit of cheese.
Yeah.
Never thinking it's themselves with no immunity to anything, or
I remember when...
Or can't fight. They haven't got the gut. There's the gut we talk about bacteria. Well, there's good bacteria as well as bad bacteria.
Yeah.
So the danger is you kill the good bacteria, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. I think it's just, I think consumers should also take some responsibility for this. I remember every summer when I worked in the fish and chip business for my dad, every summer we'd see complaints go up. And it's because they'd go to barbecues, eat raw chicken, and then
Yeah.
raw sausage off the barbecue. And then they'd say, oh, I came into the shop and I had some chips or a fish. And I remember saying to like the EHO, like, you do know that we cook fish at 185 and it's cooked for 7 minutes. And I think it's pretty low risk by the end of the process, you know. And he and then she afterwards agreed, you know, that this is completely low risk. It's done properly. And they also said that they also see a spike every summer. Every summer they see spikes. And I think consumers need to take more responsibility for this. I really do think so.
I 100% agree with that.
Mm.
And we're responsible for ourselves. We can't just think that NHS or a doctor or some government department are going to look after us. We've got to look after ourselves.
No, I agree. Yeah.
It's
a shame for those that it's a shame for those people in this case where one is dead and 8 are really poorly. But I think as long as all the risks are laid out, I hope the company can recover, especially if they've proven that they've done nothing wrong and everything's above board. It'd be a shame for that company to suffer consequences that aren't directly attributed to them. But I guess FSA will sort of, you know, they're monitoring the situation. So it'd be interesting to see. I've seen a cheese factory that uses pasteurized milk that has 0 checks. You know, that it baffles me sometimes. And we're building a factory at the minute and we're talking about accreditation and how do you know, we've got a low risk product, which is great, but you know, you've got to be careful from washing down because washing down with excess water can cause listeria. So all of these things are constant. And the UK has some of the highest food standards in the world. Definitely. So I don't believe for 1 minute that this artisan cheesemaker Kirkham's has gone out of their way to do something wrong. They clearly know what product they're dealing with. But I do think there is a massive disconnect between what happens at the factory and what happens at people's homes. And I think that's where I'm where I land really, that it's that middle bit.
Well, I totally agree with that, and there's a similarity as well when some of my concerns is that people will associate the Kirkham problem with we can't have raw milk cheeses, the same as it, and it's an isolated situation. It's blown out of all proportion. The same with the oysters. And I hope it'll never get to the stage when people say, that means we don't eat oysters.
Mm.
That's a danger because, and that's a irresponsible media as well, which I feel that people, Kirkham's and the oyster people in it, that's what they're not just fighting the FSA. They're fighting the media as well.
Yeah. But again, the media is there to whip up controversy. They say they're there to inform us, but they're there so we keep clicking. And if we keep clicking, they're getting paid. So the more they can keep whipping up a frenzy, they've done their job. They've made money. You know, because especially if they write the first story and then it gets sold onto other news platforms, they just keep making money. So the more we get outraged, the more we comment, the more we share it, we're actually funding that process. But yeah,
I'll put it in a different context on as far as what you mentioned yourself earlier about, and it's just reminded me. We had the restaurant and the fish and chips. Seafood restaurant one, on the other side beside it, we built a fish and chip shop. We had a routine inspection with the environmental health inspector, EHOs, every year. That was it. We had certain things we had to do, obviously cleaning and recording. We would have to probe certain amounts of cooked products every day, every service, and record them. That was absolutely fine. We had a system and we had files, and we kept. The EHO would do the routine visit every year, check the records, check the equipment, see that the place was clean, look at our fridges, make sure we were rotating so that we were using oldest stuff first. Nothing I had ever a problem with, Stelios. Then we opened the fish and chip shop. They come in, asked what we do and how we do it. I showed them. I said, my fryer at 183, that's all. You could say why as precise as that, I don't know. I never liked putting battered fish into a fryer less than 180. So I was always about that. So I said, we get the fish straight from the harbour. We're on the harbour anyway, so it was walking distance. We batter them, put it in the batter, cook to order from fresh. We went through the process, and do you know what they replied to me, Stelios? We won't need to come back to see you here until 5 years.
Wow.
So,
yeah, but again, if they've established that yeah. Well, it's interesting to see what happens with that, and I think we've come to our time, and I'm really grateful, and I'm really glad to see how well your podcast is doing. I think it's doing really well. It's amazing. You and Ashley are doing some good work there, and I think everyone should jump over to Seafood Matters podcast as well to have a listen.
Thank you, Stelios. Well, I really enjoy doing it, and just the situation I'm in. I've retired. My fishing is my background, and I feel having access to Ashley, who's in that business, I feel it's giving me an opportunity to give something back into fish and chips, hospitality, fishing, fish industries that I have met wonderful character and had lots of great times, and it's given me an opportunity to put something back into them. And the other thing I feel, Ashley does all the editing and producing and all the background stuff. I get the good part, talking to that characters that I knew all my life.
Poor Ashley. Well, thanks for that. Thank you for your time today, and we'll talk soon.
I have to say, I'm a very fond listener of the Ceres Podcast, and I think you do a great job. So, thank you.
I really enjoyed this episode of Read the News with Jim. What did you think to the topics covered? We'd love to know your thoughts. If you want to keep in the loop with what we're doing at Ceres, then you should be following us on social media. But remember, to get the information first and delivered to your inbox, then join our mailing list. The link will be in the episode show notes and the episode article on our website. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and on social media, because if you like this episode, then chances are others in the industry will like it too. And do us a favour, be sure to leave us a